What's up, primates? I'm Shane the Skeptic, and as always, I thank you for tuning into my channel. But today I want to express a little bit of extra gratitude toward you for tuning in because of the fact that if you saw the title of this video, that being My Life with Autism, and you clicked on it, then you came here to listen to me talk about my experience in life as an autistic person. That is, unless you stop watching right now. But if you're still watching, anyway, you came here to listen to me talk about my experience, and that's something that you are in no way, shape, or form obligated to do, so you are going the extra mile in doing so. And again, I really appreciate that. I also recognize that there might be some people who are also on the spectrum tuning in. If so, if you're someone who is open about your diagnosis with autism, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a comment and let me know how much you relate to my experience, how you differ. And if you're someone who's private about it, maybe you could reach out to me on Facebook and talk to me about it. Whatever the case, I'm just going to get into this video, my experience, right? But a quick note before I get into my experience, you might be thrown off, depending on how much you know about autism, by the vocabulary with which I'm communicating myself to you, right? I mean, sometimes your concept of an autistic person is somebody who either is nonverbal, that means they don't talk at all, or they do talk, but they talk with a very limited vocabulary, and they're not somebody who you would hold a conversation with the way that you would hold a conversation with a neurotypical person, right? While this is a misunderstanding that leads to a lot of people being surprised when they find out that I'm autistic, it is a very understandable misunderstanding. That sounds contradictory, but you'll see what I mean. I totally understand how somebody could be thrown off by the fact that a person like myself can talk with a vocabulary similar to the one that I have when your concept of autism is predicated on what's known as classic autism. You see, there are lower functioning forms of autism known as classic autism, and you have higher functioning forms of autism like Asperger syndrome. What I have is Asperger syndrome. So people who have the form of autism that I have normally have an average to above average vocabulary, IQ, intellect, while people who have classic autism tend to have they actually might not have just less of a vocabulary. Somebody who is autistic and they have classic autism, they might actually be nonverbal. Some of them are nonverbal for a very long time and they just start talking later than most kids do. But either way, there are errors in their speech, right? Like they are not able to talk to you the way that I'm talking to you right now. So it's a very understandable misapprehension that a person with autism is going to be somebody who doesn't speak to you with the type of vocabulary that I do. But if you are somebody who knows what Asperger's is, then you're probably not going to be surprised at all that I have it, right? Because you would go, okay, that kind of makes sense. So to be clear, my disability is more of a social disability. It doesn't really have to do with articulating myself or learning. I mean, I'm actually somewhat of a nerd if you really think about it. I do spend a pretty good chunk of my time studying epistemology and logic and reading and watching lectures. So it's not like I'm not academically inclined at all. It's just that when it comes to the initiation of relationships, I have a particularly difficult time. But it's not just relationships, and I'll get into friendships and relationships in a little bit, but the first thing I want to do to help you kind of understand roughly what Asperger's is explain some of the symptoms of it, and some of these symptoms I should flat out let you know I don't have. There are symptoms of Asperger's that I just don't have. There are some that I've overcome. And then there are some that I definitely have, right? And since I only know what it's like to be me, and I'm trying to figure out what behavior traits that I have are in fact traits that are caused by my autism, because that was part of preparing for this video, is figuring out what about me has anything to do with me being autistic. I was interested to find out that other people with Asperger's tend to wear solid, one color t-shirts, and that's me. If you know me, I have a few shirts where it's free hugs from Satan, or science doesn't care what you believe. I have a few, quirky little shirts like that, but no, 99% of the time when you see me, I'm in a plain t-shirt. So, that's something that I never would have guessed had anything to do with my autism. And maybe it doesn't, but it is something that's very common in people with Asperger's syndrome. So it likely is something that's influenced by my autism. So one of the defining characteristics of Asperger's syndrome is the inability, or at least difficult time with, the understanding of nonverbal social cues. And I want to give you an example that's going to kind of help you understand what it's like to be someone with Asperger's. Imagine you're somebody who's from the UK. Some of you don't have to imagine. I know a good chunk of my viewers are actually from the UK. But imagine you're from the UK, or you're from a country where tipping is not a customary thing, right? And you were going to come to the United States to visit, go on a little vacation, whatever you're doing, and you're coming alone, and you are completely unaware of the culture of tipping. You're not aware that tipping is a social norm by any means, right? So you land in America, and you go to a bar, and you decide you're not going to keep a tab open, you're going to order your drinks, and you're going to pay for them one by one. And you're hoping to make a few friends while you're out here, right? So you're at the bar, you're thinking, I'm getting myself out there, I'm going to make an effort to socialize. What could go wrong? Everything should be fine. I have nothing but the best intentions when I talk to the people next to me. I only want to make, either become friends with them, or if we're not going to become friends, I just want to have small talk, just have a positive social interaction with them. But again, I'm ordering drinks constantly, right? Or you're ordering drinks. As I'm saying, imagine this is you in this scenario. So imagine you're ordering drinks constantly, and everybody is kind of giving you dirty looks, and it's weird to you. You're catching on to the fact that people are giving you dirty looks, and people are seeming like they're a little bit angry with you. But you think about it, and this has to be in your head, because it's like all you did was come into this bar and talk to the people next to you. You haven't brought up any potentially offensive subject matter. You are being as polite as you know how to be, but everybody in the bar just seems like they're angry with you. The server, every time you ask for a drink, they just seem like they're upset that they even have to deal with you. The people next to you, again, they're just looking at you like you're a bad person. But it's got to be in your head, so you write it off as this is probably just I'm tripping. I'm just making this out to be something that it isn't. And all of a sudden, you order a drink and you go to pay for it, and the person sitting next to you just snaps. How could you be so rude? How dare you actually sit there and make this server work for free for you? Do you have any idea what you're doing? And they start shaming you. And again, you were oblivious to this. You had no idea what tipping was. Hypothetically, you had no idea, but it was the social norm, and everybody was expecting you to do it. And you did not conform to that social norm. So you were being rude by not doing this thing that everybody else does, because it's just something that you're not aware to do, right? And everybody starts clapping as you get called horrible names and told, get out of here, And everybody's just really happy that you were stood up to, because everybody thinks that you were an asshole. Everybody thinks you were the bad guy. But had you known what tipping was, you would have done it. But everybody in that social setting, they don't like you. And, if you ever see those people again, you've already made your first impression. And your first impression was failure to conform to a expected social norm. And inadvertently, you came off as a very rude person. If you imagine that feeling that I just described, that's what having Asperger's is like. So that's an example of a social norm not being understood. An example of a nonverbal cue not being understood, I think, is a really good example that a friend of mine gave me. Funny story, a friend of mine told me that he has a friend who has Asperger's, and then he started trying to explain to me what Asperger's was. And before I told him that I have it, I was like, well, actually, I want to see what he thinks it is. And what he told me was that his friend has Asperger's, and she has a hard time or inability to understand nonverbal cues. So if somebody was, say, carrying a lot of books or a lot of heavy stuff, their hands were full, and they were walking toward a door, a neurotypical person would see them, and it would be a pretty obvious intuitive thing. That person holding the stuff would kind of look at the door, and it would be like, that neurotypical person would think to get the door. As to where the person with Asperger's would probably just keep talking to that person. And it's not that they're rude and they're unwilling to open the door for a person. It's that nonverbal cue of like, hey, I'm carrying stuff and walking toward a door. Like, can you get it for me? That doesn't really occur to the person with Asperger's syndrome. So I personally don't think that I would miss that specific example, but I do think that's a really good example of a person with Asperger's just not understanding the nonverbal cue. And of course, inadvertently coming off as rude. So that's an example of a symptom that I have, but it's sort of like an overcomable obstacle, you know, like I can learn what some specific nonverbal cues are, and then I can identify them when I see them after I've learned what they are. Same thing with social norms. I can be taught them, or you know, I can have them explained to me. And at the end of the day, everybody makes mistakes, and everybody sometimes upsets people. So, I mean, really, I can live with it. So another symptom of Asperger's, one that I definitely have, is inability or difficulty with the initiation of relationships. So fortunately, I have at least 3 close friends in the state of Texas, and I have at least 3 close friends in the state of California. So in my honest opinion, I think if you have 6 good friends, that's more than most people have. So at some point, it's like, you know, I have a difficult time initiating new friendships, but it's not like I never do. And the reality is, friendships aren't something that I really struggle with as much as intimate relationships, and I'll get into that in a minute. But with friendships, I'm actually going to mention, for the sake of this video and, you know, its relevance, that I am a stoner. I've been smoking weed for a really long time. Actually, the first time that I smoked weed, I was 10 years old, and I've been smoking weed regularly since I was 13 years old. And I'm not advising anybody who's 10 or 13 to smoke weed. Don't go do what I did. So in my experience, smoking weed leads everybody to social interactions which they may have otherwise never had. Like, anybody who smokes weed knows that there's somebody that you hang out with, that you smoke with, that you become friends with, that if it weren't for weed, you and that person probably never would have otherwise ended up talking. So really, even throughout high school, I socialized pretty regularly because of the fact that I just, I liked to smoke weed with people, and there were a lot of people who also smoked weed, and we would hang out with each other. And another interesting thing about marijuana is that it does actually alleviate some of my symptoms of Asperger's, such as sensory overload. And I'll give a more in-depth explanation of what sensory overload is later, but sensory overload can lead to me being socially awkward. So when I'm high, I'm not getting sensory overload, so the cause of my social awkwardness really isn't there, so I'm able to interact with people and I don't come off as awkward as I would have if I just was sober. I mean, like, even right now, I just smoked a joint before recording this video. I recorded it in 2 takes, but in both takes, I smoked a joint before recording it. And don't get me wrong, there's still a threshold of, you know, weed that leads to me being impaired just like anybody else is. But if I'm limiting myself and I'm being responsible with it, what it does is it alleviates my sensory overload, and it makes it just a lot easier for me to interact with people. Also, like I explained earlier, you just end up having interactions with other people because you smoke and they smoke, so you're smoking together, and now you and that person are just friends. So for a long time, I didn't even really think about the fact that people with Asperger's have a hard time making friends, because I just had plenty of friends. You know, if you have 2 or 3 good friends, and by good friends I just mean close friends, if you have 2 or 3 close friends, and then, you know, can't even count on 2 hands how many friends you have that are like kind of acquaintances, then it's like, you know, I'm not really socializing too differently from neurotypical people. Like, not everybody's a social butterfly, and I think I have about as many friends as the average person. So really, there's just a way in which I was somewhat able to overcome an obstacle. However, at 19 years old, I stopped and I thought about the fact that I didn't have any friends that I didn't meet through smoking weed. I mean, I just realized that, like, I haven't learned other ways to make friends. I just haven't. How do non-weed smokers make friends? I don't know what they do. I mean, I actually still don't really know what non-weed smokers do when they hang out, but that's a separate issue. I don't know how people really make friendships, how they get initiated. You know, I've had coworkers that I talk to and we're like, you know, friends at work, right? Like we're friendly coworkers. We talk to each other, we get along, we joke with each other. We maybe even talk about some personal stuff that we're going through, but we'll never end up hanging out outside of work. Like that's a very regular thing, right? So I don't really know what people normally do to initiate a friendship. And it wasn't until I was 19 that that really stuck out to me. So in high school, I definitely became more normal, whatever that means. So it wasn't really as noticeable that I was different. But in middle school and elementary school, oh my God, 7th grade was horrible. Like people were just mean to me and would call me weird. And nobody would ever tell me why I was weird. They would just tell me that I was. And like, I remember this time, and now I can reflect on it and understand that like, oh, I'm autistic, so I acted different, and something that was different about the way that I acted caused people to, yeah, I mean, you know, kids are assholes, right? So if you're different, then kids are gonna be mean to you. I have this memory of like one time when I was in 7th grade, I go into my new class, this is the beginning of the year, I sit down, we had assigned seats, so I didn't just pick a random seat, and I had the seat assigned to me. And I sit down, and I've never seen anybody in this class, or at least I don't recognize anybody in this class. And the girl sitting next to me raises her hand, and the teacher calls on her, and she goes, "Could you move him? He's weird. I don't want to sit next to him." And, you know, I didn't realize how much of a defense mechanism it was at the time, but like, at the time, it didn't hurt my feelings. I laughed at the girl because like I thought she was stupid, and you know, it intrigued me, but it didn't bother me. It bothered me later in life when I thought about it. But at that time, and maybe it's just like a defense mechanism, but in that moment, it genuinely didn't bother me. I was like, okay, like what was her problem? I don't even know who you are, and you have enough of a problem with me that you don't want to sit next to me. But there were other times where someone would just walk up to me and go, "You creep me out." And my thought is like, if I'm a creepy person, why are you coming up to me and telling me that? Because if I'm scared of a kid, then like I'm going to be nice to him and leave him alone. Because if he's going to go shoot up the school, he's going to look at me and remember that I'm the one who was nice to him. That's what that I don't understand why, like, because I'm just so, if somebody creeps you out, you're afraid of them. Why would you be mean to someone you're afraid of? I don't get it. But people would tell me I was weird, and I had no idea why. Like, sometimes there would be like a social setting where like 3 kids were being nice to me, and maybe I'm hanging out with them for a week, and then another kid who is in their friend group comes over and looks at me and goes, "You're weird." And it's just like, it was just, and I honestly, I can't even reflect enough on whatever behavior I might have had. I mean, like I said, sometimes I don't even remember having any prior interactions with them. So like that girl's reason for thinking I was weird, to this day, like who knows? You know, not that I really care, but I have no idea what it was. So there were a lot of instances when I was a kid where it was just people being mean to me and calling me weird, and I had no idea what their problem was. But like people think a lot of stupid things, so you can really only give so much merit. Even when you're a kid, you can only give so much merit to what people think about you. Except we're a social species and we want to feel accepted, and when we feel rejected by a majority of people, it's like, it's disappointing. Why, you know, if another kid makes a joke in class, everybody thinks he's funny. And if I do the same thing that that kid did, everybody's really annoyed with me. And it just seems like there's a bias that people have against me, but even if they haven't met me, they somehow know to have that bias against me. And I meet them and I'm like, how do they know? I know that I don't deserve respect, but how do they know that I don't deserve respect? How do they know it? And that's how you feel when you're a kid. But you know, 8th grade, I became a little bit more popular, I guess. The people that I happened to be friends with happened to be popular people who had a lot of other friends, and I mean, it just became the case that I had a lot of friends for that reason. I like just happened to make the right friends who had a lot of other friends, so I was kind of in. You know, I was kind of socially connected. So there was this huge difference between my social life in school, and I switched schools 7th and 8th grade, from 7th grade to 8th grade. Actually, every year in middle school, I went to a different school. Got in a lot of trouble as a kid. But I mean, I literally in 7th grade would go and sit by myself, and this is a normal thing for kids with Asperger's to do. I would go and sit by myself while everybody else socialized with each other like normal kids. And there were a few times that I made friends throughout the year, but then sometimes those friends would just one day tell me that they didn't like me. And we'd been friends for a few months, and one day they're just being mean to me and telling me that I'm weird. And I didn't do anything. At least they're not telling me what I did. But sometimes people would be friends with me and just change their mind. And then there was one time that a girl dated me as a joke, and she did it more than once. There was a girl in high school that led me on for as a joke, but in middle school, a girl actually dated me because, like, as a joke because she thought it would be funny. And so, yeah, like, I definitely have a lot of memories of people being mean to me, but I just didn't feel bullied. You know, like, I felt like I didn't get along with people, but, you know, like, I'd never get picked on and know that I'm getting picked on and not stand up for myself. So this led to me getting in a lot of fights in middle school and the beginning of high school, right? Because naturally, if you're the awkward kid, you're going to get picked on. And if you're a kid who's, you know, I guess you could say I had kind of a tough guy mentality. And I'm still, you know, I'm a man, I'm prideful. It is what it is. So yeah, there were definitely a lot of times that I got in fights in middle school and high school. But I never felt like I was a bully victim, if that makes sense. And maybe I was, but just because of the fact that I'm not a person with victim mentality, that doesn't have to mean that, you know, being a victim and admitting it doesn't have to mean you have victim mentality. But I just, like I said, if somebody was ever mean to me, it usually led to us fighting, and then after us fighting, you know, we wouldn't interact anymore. And that's kind of why you have to stand up to bullies, right? Because if they were picking on me and I didn't stand up for myself, then something would have happened, then they would have kept picking on me. But because of the fact that if they picked on me, it usually led to a fight. After we fought, you know, the school staff would, you know, usually do something to see to it that, like, we weren't interacting with each other, that, you know, we were sitting at different sides of the classroom or whatever it was, right? Faculty will sometimes tell you, like, all right, well, don't hang out on the side of campus because those kids hang out over there. I don't know how normal that is for everybody else or any other school, but I've been told that before, that, you know, those kids hang out over there. So, you know, the dean of security in high school told me, you know, not to go to a certain area just because me and those kids don't get along. But I have friends, right? So it's like, I'm not really thinking about having difficulty initiating friendships because I have friends. And as long as you can sustain friendships, and I don't really have difficulty sustaining friendships, then, you know, once you have a few friends, you're good. And every once in a while, you know, friends come and go. But as long as every once in a while a few more friends come, you can be friends with one person for the rest of your life. So if you have 3 friends, you could pretty much be set at that. You know, some people, like, I actually think that there probably are plenty of neurotypical people who lack the kind of friendships that I have, and I actually feel sorry for them. So friendships aren't as much of a problem. But when it comes to relationships, I've only actually been in one relationship in my life, unless we're going to count the girl who dated me as a joke, right? Then there's 2. 3, there was a girl I dated for 2 days in 8th grade. I don't know if you're going to count that. I don't. I don't think a relationship that lasts for 2 days and you were in high school and you never, like, did anything, I don't think I'm counting that as a relationship, that, like, a romantic relationship that I was in. But at least in my adult life, right, or just in my life, because I think, you know, there are teenagers who have year-long relationships even. So, I actually wasn't in my first relationship until last year when I was 22 years old. So you can imagine early adulthood is really difficult, right? Especially when a lot of your friends are guys who are, they have game, whatever that is, right? They're just really good at meeting a girl, and there's chemistry, and even though they just met, they're already hooking up, or if they're not that type of person, they click and they make plans and they meet again. That's a difficult thing because like I said, struggle with nonverbal cues. And I think nonverbal cues are the main way you communicate in a intimate or romantic setting, right? So it just becomes difficult for me to really even know if somebody is interested in me in that way. And I'm always a little bit afraid of, if I meet somebody, and I can't tell you how often something like this happens, where I meet a person, I meet a girl, right? And I'm more than okay with just being friends. Like, me and this person could be friends, and that could be fine. We're going to get along. But I also find them attractive, and I'm interested in them, and if they're single, like, I want to know if I can make something of it, right? But I have a really hard time figuring out how to gauge, like, how do I figure out if this person's interested? And then even if they are, like, how do I go about initiating a type of relationship that is beyond simply a friendship? And I mean, I struggle with that, but that's something that I'm still grappling with, and it's not like I can't overcome it at all. And I mean, I learned that I'm capable of being in a relationship. The one relationship that I've been in lasted a year, so there's just a lot that I have to figure out with respect to dating. Like, when it comes to dating, just think of it as like I still haven't learned how to do it yet, and I'm still figuring it out. But once I've done it a few times, like once I've initiated a few relationships, it probably won't be as much of a barrier for me, right? So I think I mentioned that I moved to Texas when I was 17. And if I didn't, well, there it is. I moved to Texas when I was 17, and I've made friends here, but, I made a few friends, and then they moved, and then it's kind of like, I just wasn't really meeting people because I got a night shift job, which I still have to this day, and there's just not a lot of time that I have in my life to utilize for interacting with people and making friends. So even to this day, I don't know how much of my limited social life is the result of my autism and, with that, my difficulty in initiating friendships. And then how much of it is just the fact that I work a night job, and because of the fact that I work at night, I sleep during the day when everybody else is awake, right? So I really don't know how much of my limited social life is the result of my autism. But what I will say is that at 20 and 21 years old, I found myself incredibly depressed. Now, I still have depression. Clinical depression doesn't just go away, and I have clinical depression. But when I was 20 and 21, it was really bad. And I think it was when I was 20, it might have been when I was 19. No, okay, so I attempted suicide when I was 19. And I don't want to just kind of walk over that, but like, it's not really surprising that that would happen when you feel just rejected by humanity, like nobody wants anything to do with you. And sometimes it just feels that way for me. And so I'm 21 years old, and I'm frustrated because of the fact that I live in Texas, and all the people that I end up interacting with are Christian. And it's not that I can't be friends with Christians, it's just that I have a really difficult time being friends with somebody who thinks that I'm going to be eternally tortured in fire and worships the person who's going to torture me. And that person believes in a God who commands things like genocide, and they worship it, and it's just, I don't understand how a person could worship a God that commands genocide. And so I criticize their religion because their religion is morally bankrupt, and it just leads to arguments, right? So I find myself regularly getting in situations where I'm talking to people about religion, And because of the fact that religion inevitably comes up with me, because it's one of my specific interests, a lot of the time friendships didn't last very long because of the fact that I'm a critic of religion, and that's not going to change. I'm willing to take people's dislike toward me as being something that comes with openly criticizing religion. I'm okay with that. But you also have to understand that living in Texas, that did make me more limited in my social life. So I found myself regularly arguing with Christians, and it's just like, so I found myself regularly arguing with Christians, and it's like, yeah, it felt like the closest thing I had to friends were the people that I argued with every day. And, well, that was just annoying. And another symptom of Asperger's that I'll just kind of briefly mention here is a very intense specific interest. People with Asperger's tend to have limited interests, but the interests that they have, they're obsessed with. And for me, religion was one of those things. And so even though I'm an atheist, I'm obsessed with religion. And religious people generally don't want to talk about religion. So that just led to a lot of bad social interactions. But fortunately, I discovered that there was a community nearby called the Atheist Community of Austin. And while the community eventually became worth leaving, when I first went to that community, I found myself in a room full of other atheists for the first time. And I think that if you talk to anybody who knows me, they'll tell you that people don't often think my autistic friend Shane. They do more often think my atheist friend Shane. That's a little bit more often. People are more likely to identify me with my atheism than they are to identify me with my autism. So even though I have limited specific interests, being able to find an atheist community, people who were also interested in, making content and debating Christians, it led to me having an opportunity to meet a bunch of people who shared my specific interest. So here I found myself with another opportunity to socialize with a bunch of other people, and it wasn't going to matter that my interests were limited because I'm interested in something that everybody here has in common. Everybody's here because they have this mutual interest. So it doesn't matter that I have a limited specific interest. Everybody's here because of the same one. So really, that was an awesome thing. So I get involved in the atheist community, and that doesn't just mean the atheist community of Austin. Now I'm meeting a bunch of atheist YouTubers who have nothing to do with that community, right? And I can talk to people about the experience that they had with their religion growing up, what their deconversion process was like, kind of compare it to mine, and so I have another way of interacting with people. Now I'm meeting people and making friends that don't even smoke weed. And that was a huge thing for me because that showed that it was no longer the case that I only had one way of making friends. Now I had at least two: weed and atheist activism. But then atheist activism leads me to philosophy. Well, philosophers are not all atheists. So now I have a way that I can make friends who don't have my same worldview, but we still share something in common that we can talk about and bond over and start a friendship over. And that's one of the reasons I'm always telling people, it's like, the fact that I like to debate Christians and I criticize Christianity as often and vehemently as I do, that doesn't mean if you're a Christian person, we can't be friends. In fact, there are some people that I know that are Christians that I get along with way better than some atheists. So, it really just comes down to the person. But now, because of the fact that atheist activism took me to philosophy, philosophy is taking me to conversations with people who aren't atheists. So, now there are multiple ways in which I am making other friends. And I mentioned that I've only been in one relationship before. Well, that one person that I've been in a relationship with, I wouldn't have met if it wasn't for the atheist community. So now I'm at a point in my life where I have multiple pathways to different types of relationships. And the fact that I have difficulty initiating them sometimes isn't that much of a problem because if you go to something like an atheist event, if there's going to be a lot of people there, people will usually come up to you and start initiating a conversation with you. So when I first went to the atheist community of Austin, if anybody watching this video knows who Eric Murphy is, shout out to Skeptic Generation, Eric Murphy would, come and introduce himself to whoever came to the community and, would sort of, as long as you have that one first person to be welcoming to you, the next thing you know, you're having a conversation with them and somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And so when you show up at any atheist event, any event where there's going to be a whole lot of atheists, even if you are a completely socially awkward person and you just have a hard time approaching people, you will probably get approached. People in the atheist community, they just come up to you and will start talking to you. Not all of them, but somebody will. I also recently went to an event called Faithless Forum, where there were a bunch of atheist content creators and naturally a bunch of people who follow their content and, came to see other atheists and whatnot. Now, a fan of mine, or maybe I'm dating myself if I say fan. Well, I could probably say fan. At least somebody who enjoyed my content, apparently enjoyed my content enough to be willing to buy me a ticket to go to this event. So I actually got to go to this event for free. And I had a great time there, and I met a lot of people, and, like I said, other people would interact with me, and now because of the fact that I'm a content creator, there were actually people that approached me because they recognized some work that I'd done. So now, because of the fact that I'm a content creator, people who, even if they're not particularly into philosophy, they've seen my content, and that gives them a reason to come and initiate a conversation with me. And if you ever see me in person, I'm not a shy person, so if you want to come up and say hi, that's cool. We could probably talk for a minute. I'm not a difficult person to get along with. But at the end of this event, there was this after party that I wasn't aware you had to buy a separate ticket to go to the after party, so I planned on going to the after party, but then I realized that I didn't have the ticket necessary for it. But I thought that's fine because there was still this other area right next to where the party was, and I thought, there's a balcony, some people will come out to smoke, some people will, just come over here to hang out or whatever, so I'll still hang out at this event for maybe another hour or so, kill time. And I sat down in this one area, and for a minute I was sitting down by myself. And then this girl that I met at the event, don't know if she'd be cool with being named or not, so her name doesn't, isn't completely relevant, so whatever. And if anybody's familiar with Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules, him and her, they kind of noticed that I was sitting by myself, and they took it upon themselves to kind of just walk over to me, talk to me, and they were like, we'll just kind of walk back and forth, hang out with you for a bit, hang out over there. So my point is, in the atheist community, something like that happening is really normal. People will make sure that you feel welcome. And I didn't feel unwelcome at that event by not having a ticket to that after party. I totally understood that. I just didn't know that I needed a ticket for it. But the point is that there were still at least two people who were willing to go the extra mile to make me feel welcome. And to a person with autism who doesn't have a hard time talking to people, but has a hard time initiating the conversation, that's actually a huge thing for me. So the fact that I'm now part of a community where if I go to a social event, I could expect something like that to happen is a big enough thing that it kind of makes the obstacle invisible for me. Because if people are coming up to me and initiating conversations with me, then even if I have a hard time initiating conversations, how much does that really matter? Conversations are getting started one way or another. All that really matters is that they happen. So I'm definitely somewhat of a socially awkward person, but when I smoke weed, my anxiety and sensory overload, which cause my social awkwardness, tend to go away. And, when those go away, I'm not awkward. So most of the time I'm really, even if I'm a little bit awkward, I'm pretty much interacting with me is, I don't think, too different from interacting with a regular person. Although I will say that I do very regularly get told things like, you're the most interesting person I've ever met, or something like that. Or some people will tell me, or strange or interesting. people very regularly tell me that I am the strangest or most interesting person that they've ever met. And to be honest with you, I have no idea how often other people hear that. So I don't know how strange or interesting I really am, right? Because if you're a neurotypical person, actually, whether you're neurotypical or autistic, if you could leave a comment and tell me, do people say that to you? Do people ever tell you that you're the most interesting person they've met? Because I get that a lot, and I wonder if that has something to do with the way that I behave because of the fact that I'm autistic. So relationships are something that I still struggle with. I went through my first breakup something like 8 months ago. So for the first 5 or 6 months, I don't think I was really ready to move on. So now it's only been like 2 or 3 months that I've been like single and ready to move on again. So, but then, you know, we've been in a pandemic, so I haven't been really like getting myself out there very much. So right now, I'm actually not really sure how good or bad I am at initiating something beyond a friendship with a woman that I like, but like in more than one way. Because you always want to be careful when you express to somebody that you're interested in them, that like, and this is really hard for me to ever get across to someone, is like, okay, even if your answer to like dating or intimacy is no, I mean, if I wanted to date you or be intimate with you, you had to have had a few qualities that I like about you enough that I should also be willing to be friends with you. So it's just, sometimes you get to a point where you value your friendship with somebody so much that it's like, okay, well, I don't want to risk ruining this friendship because of the fact that I felt lonely and I like this person. So fear of ruining friendships definitely stands in the way of me getting in relationships. I still don't really fully understand how relationships work. You know, like, are you supposed to become friends with the person first? I definitely am not that guy that could just approach a woman and be like, hey, insert cheesy pickup line, could I get your number? And I don't wish that I was doing that, to be honest with you. I mean, I wish I could approach girls and talk to them and it work out, but not the pickup line thing. So I still got to figure out exactly like how relationships even happen, you know, because sometimes I'll be in public and I'll see a woman and I'll think she's beautiful and I'll be like, I wish I knew what to do, like to make something happen. I don't know what to do. That's a beautiful person is all I can really think, and they'll walk away. And you know, I wish I knew how to walk up to them and make something happen. I wish I knew how to make that person want to hang out with me later, but I don't know how to do that. And I also don't want to bother people. So sometimes when I'm even initiating a friendship, I just don't know, like, you know, am I crossing boundaries? Am I making somebody not like me? Am I being kind of desperate and annoying? Like, am I hitting them up too often? I just don't know with all that. And it's really difficult opening up about the fact that I want to figure out how to appropriately initiate relationships, because I literally have asked, like, what are appropriate versus inappropriate settings to approach someone and what makes the inappropriate settings inappropriate. And I did ultimately get the response of like, women don't exist for you. And like that kind of thing is just like happens all the time, but you have to learn how to not give merit to every opinion that you hear. But you know, I don't want people to think that I only value a human being because I find them attractive. You know, I could find somebody attractive and still value them as a human being. And to me, that's just a natural thing. You being attractive doesn't change your value as a person. So it's kind of weird to me that like, that is a thing that other people do, but it is. So I understand why people are on their guard and everybody is kind of like, just cautious that you are only interested in them for sexual reasons. So when it comes to the difficulty of the initiation of a relationship, yeah, you can put me down as having that symptom. And another symptom I want to address, a very misunderstood or misleading symptom of Asperger's, is the lack of empathy. Now, I should preface this by saying that I don't see this as a symptom that I suffer from, but I also need to elaborate on what this means when a person with Asperger's does lack empathy. You see, there are two different types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy and there's affective empathy. And effective empathy is what you and I mean in a colloquial sense when we use the word empathy. You know, if I see another person and that person is on fire, like I feel pain because fire is hot and that is a human being. And I'm somebody who has on more than one occasion cried during a Pixar movie. You know, I don't see why I'm crying at a Pixar movie if I don't have empathy, you know. And I actually remember going through the thought process of like, this is weird that I'm emotional over this because I'm aware that these are fictional characters. But it's self-evident that I have empathy. Effective empathy, that is. Cognitive empathy, on the other hand, is really the ability to look into somebody else's mind and see why they're thinking or feeling the way that they do. And I'll be honest, I thought about this just before making this video. It could be the case that I used to lack cognitive empathy, or still do, and that is a pretty big part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with epistemology. I talked earlier about people with Asperger's having a very limited set of interests, and those interests they are obsessed with. For me, that's epistemology. And I think the fact that people with Asperger's are known to lack cognitive empathy, and you know, cognitive empathy is the ability to understand why somebody's thinking what they think, or why they're feeling the way that they do. It could be the case that the reason I am drawn to epistemology is because it helps me increase my cognitive empathy. But that's something that I'm going to leave an open question because I'm not really sure about it. So to be clear, I don't think that I lack cognitive empathy, but I am certain that I do not lack effective empathy, which, to be honest, is somewhat of a hurtful misunderstanding because, you know, if you Google, do people with Asperger's, one of the suggested results is, you know, do they have emotions? And the next one is, do they have empathy? You know, when I realized that enough people have wondered whether or not people with Asperger's have empathy, that it was a suggested search result, you know, I mean, that kind of hurts to know, but I don't blame people for wondering it. I just, you know, it sucks. But that's why I have the ability to explain myself, or not even myself, I just have the ability to explain that here. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about that is simply just part of having Asperger's syndrome is experiencing sensory overload. Sensory overload happens when your empirical senses are taking in more information than your brain is really able to process at once. This could easily be initiated by a trigger. For some people, this is going to be more like fluorescent lights. And then for some people, it's going to be a lot of noise. You have the combination of these things and you just have a perfect storm. When your brain gets more information that you're able to process, you enter like a flight or fright or a freeze. And what ends up happening is a lot of the time, so for me, the trigger sound is the sound of chewing. I cannot be around the sound of chewing. And it negatively impacts me a lot because if somebody's chewing gum, I cannot be around them. And I don't want to be that annoying person to ask them to spit their gum out. But if you're chewing gum, especially chewing it loudly, I cannot be in a room with you. And if I try to just deal with it and you're chewing gum and you're talking to me, or let's say I'm talking to you and somebody else in the room is chewing gum, then even though I'm looking you in your eyes as you're talking to me and I heard every word that you said, I didn't process any of it. So I wouldn't be able to repeat anything that you said back to you, simply because of the fact that somebody else in the room was chewing while I was talking to you. And this is why I get particularly annoyed when somebody on a podcast or somebody in a Discord server chews into their microphone. I mean, I really don't understand why you're eating while you're on a live stream or on Discord in the first place. I honestly, and maybe that's my lack of cognitive empathy, but I don't understand why you're eating while you're doing that. But there was one time where there was a few guys reviewing a conversation that I had with a philosopher, and as they're reviewing this conversation, I really wanted to watch it because it was a review of a discussion that I had, and because these guys were complimenting me. I mean, complimenting me a lot, almost, you know, biasedly, like too much. And I loved listening to their stream until one guy just decides to start eating during the stream. And his microphone is also louder than everyone else's microphone. And he's just chewing right into the microphone. And it sucked because I wanted to hear this review of my, not debate, but conversation. But because somebody was chewing during the stream, I couldn't listen to it. So if you've ever done a live stream and somebody was chewing in that stream, I promise you I didn't listen to it. I can't. Especially headphones. Oh my God, it's the worst. So sensory overload, for me, it isn't only caused by the sound of chewing. it's almost the only thing that by itself is going to cause it. Because if there's a lot of bright lights and there's a lot of people and there's a lot of noise, okay, maybe I'll start getting sensory overload, even though there isn't the sound of chewing happening. But the sound of chewing is the one thing that in itself is going to give me that experience. And if I try to deal with somebody chewing gum, because I don't think that everybody in the world has to cater to my autism. So, you know, if I'm at work and my coworker was chewing gum, it would really annoy me, and maybe it wouldn't bother him too much if I asked him to spit it out. But I have a difficult time because, I don't know, I feel like not everybody has to cater to me, right? And so if I deal with somebody chewing gum, I just, and another example where I might do this would be if I get in an Uber or a Lyft and I just don't feel like asking the driver to spit their gum out. If it's been over 2 minutes, I just feel like it's too late, honestly, too. Sometimes I get in and it's so bad that I can't help but ask them. But if I've dealt with it for a minute, I feel like I just have to deal with it for the ride. But if I get in an Uber and the driver is chewing gum, I'm not going to get out of the car in a good mood. It's going to completely ruin my mood. The sound of chewing will destroy my good mood. And that sound is my kryptonite. And everyone who's autistic probably has a certain sound or a certain something, a certain texture that they don't like. Fluorescent lights. There's something that they have to avoid it like the plague. And yeah, so for me, it's something that I inevitably will have to be around sometimes because people chew gum and people gotta eat. So sometimes I might be in a room with a few friends and I'll just get up and I'll just walk out of the room really quickly, and everybody's kind of like what just happened? Like, we were all just getting along. Like, Shane just kind of got up and left like he was angry. If someone's known me for more than half a year, they'll usually go, yeah, well, if somebody's eating, that's why. Like, if I just leave out of nowhere without saying anything, like 99% of the time, it's because somebody's chewing and I don't feel like telling them, hey, can you stop doing that? Hey, can you mute your microphone if it's on Discord? You know, I have a really difficult time communicating that to people because I've had a lot of experiences where I've requested that somebody either spit their gum out or not chew as loud, and that's annoying. So I've had people be really, really rude to me about it. So because of the fact that I've had so many experiences where it resulted in somebody not liking me, I'm just kind of inclined toward not saying anything. And the last symptom that I'm going to bring up really quickly that a lot of people with Asperger's have is the inability to hold or maintain eye contact. I don't really struggle with eye contact. It's harder to tell watching a video because, you know, I'm looking into a lens, not a person's eyes, and then I have a screen over here that's distracting me, so I'm kind of looking at it sometimes as I record. But really the way that when you see me, I'm looking into the camera most of the time, but you'll also see me like I kind of just did. I'll just kind of look over there. I'll kind of look away while I'm thinking sometimes. I do that, but I really don't struggle with holding eye contact. I just look away sometimes. So if you want to say that I do have that symptom, but I just have it mildly, then that's the case. But yeah, just another symptom of Asperger's to know about. Another symptom of Asperger's that I used to have, but I overcame, was the inability to understand non-literal language. So, you know, metaphors, allegories, idioms, similes, whatever. People with Asperger's are known for really struggling with that. So it's like if you tell somebody with Asperger's, like, put yourself in their shoes, a lot of them might go like, why would I do that? I don't know what size shoe they are. Their shoes might smell. What are you talking about? And it's funny because I actually talked to my mom about this video that I'm working on, and I brought up this being something that I didn't struggle with, and my mom said, oh no, when you were a kid, you really struggled with this, and you had to be taught how to understand non-literal language. Now I don't think I struggle with that at all, and the reason is, and I'll give you a few reasons, is because I actually use analogies to make points all the time, and people often make analogies to make arguments, and I pick up on what they're saying being an analogy. You know, I could hear a metaphor for the first time, and usually I'll pick up on the fact that it's a metaphor. And if I don't, I really feel like it's more likely that it's just a bad metaphor. But yeah, most of the time when somebody presents me with a metaphor, I'm able to pick up on it. And the only time I ever get accused of taking something at face value and I'm being told that it's not meant to be taken at face value is when I read and criticize the Bible. But to be fair, neurotypical, autistic, Christian, atheist, people have not arrived at convergence on how the Bible is meant to be interpreted. So I really don't think I'm going to attribute, I'm, according to some people, not interpreting the Bible correctly. I'm not really going to give that any merit. I don't think that has to do with my autism, so that's kind of just worthy of being dismissed if you ask me. Although I am interested in how other people interpret the Bible, and I could learn the multiple different ways that people go about it, but, at the end of the day, snakes don't talk, Earth isn't 6,000 years old, people don't live in the stomachs of whales, and I don't see any criteria used to differentiate between which stories in the Bible are true and then which ones are meant to be taken as allegorical. Like, whenever you ask a Christian, like, okay, what criteria do you use to differentiate between the literal verses and then the ones that aren't meant to be taken literally? It seems like the ones that they want to take literally are the ones that they do, and the ones that aren't very palatable, they say, oh, well, that's allegorical, because it's really just hard to accept that a snake talked. But anyway, so yeah, those are some symptoms of Asperger syndrome, how it affects my life. I don't think about the fact that I'm autistic every day. It definitely affects my life, but it isn't a crippling disability for me. I may potentially make more content talking about being autistic or talking about autism or Asperger syndrome in the future, but if this is your first time tuning into my channel, I should let you know that this channel is not about autism. It's not about my experience as an autistic person. That's just what this video is. But if you'd like to see me talk about this again, please let me know. And if you want to support my channel, please subscribe if you have not already subscribed. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. You can help me get there, so please subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you found it helpful. And of course, if you can, donate through Patreon or PayPal, but that's if you can. I'm Shane the Skeptic, and I thank you for taking the time to watch my video and listen to my experience. Hope you have a good day.